The crystal goblet slipped from my fingers in slow motion. I tried to catch it, I really did, but the condensation on the glass betrayed me. The dark red Cabernet splashed across the pristine white silk of my sister Cressida's custom-made $100,000 gown. The silence in the grand ballroom was instant and suffocating. Before I could even gasp, before the first apology could leave my lips, my father, Alaric, closed the distance between us. His hand swung backward. The slap cracked across my face with the force of a gunshot. The impact threw me off balance. My high heel caught the edge of the rug, and I went down hard. My face smashed against the cold, polished marble floor. I tasted copper. Blood dripped from my split lip, hitting the pristine white marble with a sickening tap. The string quartet stopped playing. 200 of Boston's elite held their breath. My father stood over me, his face twisted in pure, unadulterated disgust. His voice echoed through the cavernous room, shaking the chandeliers. "Disgrace. You ruin everything. Get out." I looked up dazed, my cheek burning like it was on fire. I searched the crowd for a single sympathetic face. My eyes landed on Cressida. She wasn't horrified. She wasn't shocked. She stood there, running a hand over the ruined silk of her dress, and she smirked. A tiny, triumphant smirk. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I pushed myself off the floor, wiped the blood from my chin, and walked out of the ballroom. My heels clicked against the floor, a steady, lonely rhythm. I walked out into the freezing night, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I left the party, the glitz, the fake smiles, and the man who was supposed to protect me. I just left. But the real nightmare didn't start with the slap. It started when I got to my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, and looked at my phone. 53 missed calls. Every single one from my family. And not one of them was calling to see if I was okay. They were calling to control the narrative. And right then, staring at that glowing screen, I realized something that shifted my entire universe. I had nothing left to lose, and they had everything. The air in my small sedan felt thinner than usual. I sat there in the driver's seat, the engine off, the heater dead, letting the Boston winter seep through the windows. My jaw throbbed in time with my heartbeat. The metallic taste of blood was still thick on my tongue. I leaned over and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. A harsh red handprint was blossoming across my left cheek, stark against my pale skin. My bottom lip was split right down the middle, a jagged little canyon of red. I looked like a stranger. Or maybe, for the first time in my 27 years, I looked exactly like what I was, the punching bag of the Alaric Empire. My father is a man who builds skyscrapers and tears down people. He runs one of the largest commercial real estate firms on the East Coast. He is a man who values appearance above loyalty, above kindness, above blood. And Cressida, my older sister, is his masterpiece. She is 30, beautiful, ruthless, and the CEO of a luxury lifestyle brand that our father funded. She is the golden child. She never takes a wrong step, never speaks out of turn, and never, ever misses an opportunity to remind me of my place in the dirt. I am Vesper. I am the invisible one. I am a forensic accountant at a mid-level firm downtown. I spend my days digging through spreadsheets, tracking missing funds, and exposing financial liars. It is quiet work. Honest work. But to my father, it is an embarrassment. He tells his country club friends that I have a little desk job and changes the subject. Tonight was the annual charity gala. The one night a year I am required to show up, wear a dress I cannot afford, and pretend we are a happy family for the cameras. I hated every second of it. I hated the fake smiles. I hated the way the wealthy guests looked right through me to wave at Cressida. I was just standing near the buffet, trying to stay out of the way, holding a glass of wine I wasn't even drinking. A waiter, rushing to refill a caviar station, bumped my elbow. That was all it took. The glass tipped. The wine flew. And my life shattered. I stared at the dashboard. My phone screen lit up again. Call number 54. It was Thaddeus, my father's attack dog of a lawyer. A man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes. I pressed the ignore button. Why were they calling so desperately? If I was such a disgrace, why didn't they just let me drive away into the night and never come back? My father had literally screamed at me to get out. So I did. I gave them exactly what they wanted. The Golden family was free of the stain. Yet, the phone kept buzzing. It vibrated violently against the center console, a relentless, angry insect. I took a deep breath, wincing as the cold air hit my split lip. I needed to go home. I needed to put ice on my face and lock my door. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the country club parking lot. The road was dark, winding through the wealthy suburbs where mansions sat behind high iron gates. Houses that looked like the one I grew up in. Houses full of secrets and silent violence. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The sting on my cheek was fading, replaced by a deep, hollow ache in my chest. The smirk. That was what haunted me the most. Cressida's smirk. She had loved it. She had loved watching our father strike me down. She had probably prayed for a moment like that for years. I drove for 40 minutes, my mind racing through a million different scenarios. Would they cut me off entirely? I didn't care. I paid my own rent. I paid my own bills. I didn't take a dime of their dirty money. But then, why the panic? Why the endless calls? I pulled into the narrow parking space behind my apartment building. It was a modest brick building in a working-class neighborhood. No doorman. No marble lobby. Just peeling paint and the smell of someone cooking garlic down the hall. I loved it. It was mine. I grabbed my cheap clutch purse from the passenger seat. It felt unusually heavy. I didn't think much of it as I locked the car and hurried up the 3 flights of stairs to my door. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I finally managed to turn the deadbolt. I pushed the door open, stepped inside, and threw the deadbolt locked behind me. I leaned against the heavy wood, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor in the dark. The silence of my apartment wrapped around me, safe and familiar. But my phone buzzed again in my pocket. I pulled it out. A text message from Thaddeus. Vesper. Answer the phone. This is not a game. If you do not return to the venue immediately, there will be severe consequences. Severe consequences? For getting slapped? For bleeding on their floor? I let out a dry, bitter laugh that cracked my lip open again. I stood up, walked into the tiny kitchen, and tossed my purse onto the counter. It hit the laminate surface with a heavy, metallic clunk. That wasn't the sound of a tube of lipstick and a cheap compact. I frowned. I reached into the bag and dumped its contents onto the counter. My keys, my wallet, a crumpled tissue, and something else. Something that didn't belong to me. There, sitting on my cheap kitchen counter, was a sleek, black USB drive with a solid gold trim. It had my father's corporate crest engraved on the side. My blood ran cold. During the chaos, right after the slap, I had scrambled to gather my things from the VIP table before fleeing. My vision had been blurry with tears and shock. I must have swept this off the table along with my purse. My phone buzzed one more time. Another text from Thaddeus. If you touch the data on that drive, you will go to prison. Do not make this worse for yourself. I stared at the tiny metal rectangle. My father was a man who kept his secrets buried under layers of corporate shell companies and ironclad NDAs. He didn't carry data around unless it was something too sensitive for the cloud. Something he needed on him at all times. And I, the forensic accountant he despised, had just walked out the door with it. What was he hiding in the dark? I didn't sleep that night. How could I? I sat at my small, wobbly dining table, staring at the gold-rimmed USB drive like it was an unexploded bomb. The streetlights outside cast long, haunting shadows across my living room walls. The silence of the apartment was broken only by the hum of my old refrigerator and the frantic, echoing thoughts in my head. My cheek had swollen to the size of a golf ball, a dark, ugly purple bruise spreading from my cheekbone down to my jaw. I had held a bag of frozen peas to it until my skin went numb, but the pain wasn't just physical. It was a deep, historical ache. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a faded green notebook. The cover was frayed, the pages yellowed with age. I called it my Museum of Invisible Children. It was a record of every slight, every injustice, every cruel word spoken to me since I was 12 years old. I didn't write in it to wallow in misery. I wrote in it to maintain my sanity. When you grow up in a house where reality is constantly rewritten to favor the golden child, you need a physical anchor to the truth. Otherwise, you start to believe you really are crazy. You start to believe you deserve the abuse. I flipped through the pages. The handwriting changed from a messy adolescent scrawl to the sharp, precise print of an accountant, but the theme remained the same. Page 14. Cressida's 18th birthday. She received a brand new, custom-painted Porsche. I received a lecture about not eating too much cake because I was looking a bit soft. Page 32. My high school graduation. My father didn't show up. He was too busy flying to Paris to watch Cressida walk in a minor fashion show. Page 50. The day I got accepted into the top accounting program in the state. I proudly showed him the letter. He sneered, tossed it on his desk, and said, "A bean counter." How utterly pedestrian. Try not to embarrass the family name with your peasant ambitions. I ran my fingers over the dry ink. I had spent my entire life trying to prove I was worthy of a scrap of his respect. I worked 3 jobs in college to pay for my textbooks, so I wouldn't have to ask him for a dime. I graduated top of my class. I landed a job at a respected firm. I built a life of integrity. And what did it get me? A slap in the face in front of 200 people. Blood on my chin. A sister who smiled at my humiliation. I looked at the USB drive sitting next to the notebook. Thaddeus's threat rang in my ears. If you touch the data on that drive, you will go to prison. It was a bold claim. A desperate claim. My father was terrified. The great Alaric, the untouchable titan of Boston real estate, was sweating over a tiny piece of plastic in the hands of his useless daughter. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. My job, the very profession he mocked as garbage digging, was exactly what gave me the power to destroy whatever was on that drive. I knew how to follow the money. I knew how to find the hidden ledgers. I knew how to read the stories that numbers tried to hide. I picked up a pen, turned to a fresh page in the green notebook, and wrote the date. Then I wrote, "Spilled wine. Slapped by Alaric." Cressida smiled. Stole the drive. I didn't plan to steal it. It was a genuine accident. But now that I had it, giving it back felt like handing a loaded gun back to my attacker. Yet, plugging it into my computer was dangerous. If it had tracking software, or if it was encrypted with self-destruct protocols, I could lose whatever leverage I had. Or worse, Thaddeus wasn't bluffing, and I really would be crossing a legal line that could end my career. As dawn broke, painting the Boston skyline in bruised shades of purple and gray, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I wasn't going to cower in my apartment waiting for them to crush me. I got up, walked to the bathroom, and looked in the mirror. The bruise was spectacular. It looked violent. It looked undeniable. I didn't try to cover it with makeup. I wanted the world to see what Alaric had done. I washed my face, put on a sharp black blazer and trousers, and tied my hair back in a tight bun. The woman staring back at me wasn't a scared little girl. She was a professional investigator. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a heavy, persistent knock on my front door. It was 7 in the morning. Nobody visits a cheap apartment building at 7 in the morning on a Saturday unless they are bringing trouble. I walked quietly to the door and peered through the peephole. Standing in the dim hallway, looking incredibly out of place in his bespoke charcoal suit, was Thaddeus. He was alone. He carried a sleek leather briefcase and an expression of extreme annoyance. I didn't want to open the door. Every instinct screamed at me to pretend I wasn't home. But hiding was what the old Vesper would do. The new Vesper, the one with a split lip and a stolen USB drive, turned the deadbolt and pulled the door open. Thaddeus didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past me, his leather shoes clicking loudly on my cheap hardwood floor. He looked around my small living room with naked distaste, his eyes lingering on a water stain on the ceiling. "Charming," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I see the bean-counting business is booming." "Get out," I said quietly, leaving the front door wide open. Thaddeus ignored me. He set his briefcase on my small dining table, right next to the green notebook, though he didn't seem to notice the USB drive I had already slipped into my blazer pocket. He snapped the briefcase open and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "Sit down, Vesper. We need to handle this mess before the rumor mill starts spinning," he commanded, gesturing to a chair. "I prefer to stand," I replied, crossing my arms. "And there is no mess. Alaric assaulted me in public. That is a fact, not a rumor." Thaddeus sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose as if dealing with a petulant toddler. "Your father is under a tremendous amount of stress. The market is volatile. The upcoming product launch for Cressida's brand has him on edge. You provoked a scene. He reacted poorly. We are here to make it right." He slid the documents across the table toward me. "This is a standard non-disclosure agreement. You agree not to discuss last night's incident with the press, on social media, or with any third parties. In exchange, your father is offering you $20,000 as a gesture of goodwill. All you have to do is sign this, return the property you removed from the venue, and issue a brief public apology to Cressida for ruining her dress." I stared at him. The sheer audacity of it left me momentarily speechless. He hits me, and I have to apologize to Cressida? "The dress was worth $100,000, Vesper," Thaddeus said smoothly. "And the embarrassment you caused her is incalculable. $20,000 is a very generous offer for someone in your tax bracket." I walked over to the table and looked down at the contract. It was thick. Too thick for a simple NDA. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon. I had read hundreds of these in my line of work. I knew exactly where lawyers hid the poison pills. I flipped to page 4. Section 7, subsection B. The text was tiny, buried under a mountain of boilerplate confidentiality clauses. But there it was. Plain as day. "The undersigned hereby waives any and all current or future claims to the maternal trust fund established on." My breath caught in my throat. My mother had died when I was 10. She came from old money, quiet money, and before she passed, she set up a trust fund for me. $1.5 million, meant to unlock when I turned 30. Alaric had fought for years to get his hands on it, claiming he needed to manage it for me. I had always refused to sign the release forms. And now, Thaddeus was trying to trick me into signing it away under the guise of an NDA for a slap. I looked up at Thaddeus. He was watching me closely, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. He knew I had found it. He knew he had failed. I picked up a pen from the table. Thaddeus exhaled, looking relieved. He thought I was going to cave. He thought the sight of a $20,000 check was enough to blind me to the theft of $1.5 million. I brought the pen down to the paper. But I didn't sign my name. I drew a massive, thick black X across the entire page, tearing the paper in the process. "I need 2 days to think about this generous offer," I said, my voice dead calm. Thaddeus's face flushed dark red. "You are playing a dangerous game, Vesper. You do not want to make an enemy of Alaric." "He's already my enemy, Thaddeus. Tell him he'll have his answer on Monday." I pointed to the open door. "Now, get out." He snatched the ruined contract, shoved it into his briefcase, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I stood alone in the quiet apartment, my hand wrapped tightly around the USB drive in my pocket. They were trying to steal my mother's legacy. They were trying to erase me. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. I needed someone who knew Alaric's monsters. I needed the one person who had fought him and survived. I needed Aunt Delphine. But would she even open the door for me? The drive to Delphine's house was a blur of gray skies and nervous adrenaline. I hadn't seen my aunt in 10 years. The family story, the one Alaric relentlessly drilled into everyone's heads, was that Delphine had gone crazy. He claimed she had a mental breakdown, demanded a ridiculous share of the family business, and when she was denied, she threw a hysterical fit and cut ties with everyone. She became the boogeyman of the family. A warning of what happens when you cross Alaric. But as I navigated the winding roads toward the coast, a different narrative began to form in my mind. If Alaric was lying about my trust fund, if he was willing to assault me in public and then try to financially ruin me in private, what else had he lied about? Delphine lived in a remote, brutally modern glass and steel house perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. It was a far cry from the suffocating, antique-filled mansion I grew up in. This place looked like a fortress built for someone who wanted to see their enemies coming from miles away. I parked my car, my hands sweating despite the cold air. I walked up to the heavy steel front door and pressed the intercom button. I waited. Only the sound of crashing waves answered me. I pressed it again. "State your business," a sharp, crackling voice came through the speaker. It was a voice I hadn't heard in a decade, but it still held the same undeniable authority. "Aunt Delphine? It's Vesper. Please. I need help." A long, agonizing silence followed. I thought she was going to ignore me. I thought she was going to leave me standing in the cold. Then, a heavy mechanical clunk echoed from the door, and it swung open with a smooth hiss. I stepped inside. The house was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the raging ocean. The furniture was minimalist, the art aggressive and modern. It didn't look like the home of a crazy person. It looked like the home of a survivor. Delphine stood in the center of the living room, pouring amber liquid from a crystal decanter into 2 heavy glasses. She wore a tailored linen suit, her silver hair cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob. She looked up as I entered, her piercing blue eyes locking onto my face. She didn't gasp. She didn't rush over to hug me. She simply picked up the 2 glasses, walked over, and handed me one. "Bourbon," she said, her voice crisp. "Drink it. You look like you're about to pass out on my imported rug." I took the glass with shaking hands and downed a large swallow. It burned all the way down, settling like a warm fire in my stomach. Delphine studied my face, her eyes narrowing as she took in the massive, dark purple bruise covering my cheek and the swollen, split lip. "Alaric?" she asked quietly. I nodded, suddenly finding it hard to speak. The sheer relief of being in a room with someone who didn't immediately blame me for my own assault was overwhelming. "Last night, at the charity gala, I bumped a waiter. Wine spilled on Cressida's dress. He just snapped. He hit me in front of everyone. He called me a disgrace and told me to get out." Delphine took a slow sip of her bourbon, her expression unreadable. "And what did Cressida do?" She smirked, I whispered, the memory feeling like a fresh cut. Delphine let out a harsh, barking laugh. It wasn't a happy sound. "Of course she did. She's his perfect little mirror. A beautiful, empty reflection of his own narcissism." She walked over to a sleek leather sofa and gestured for me to sit. "Sit down, Vesper. Tell me why you're really here. You didn't drive all the way out here just to show me your battle scars. You want something." I sat down, placing my glass on the glass coffee table. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the black and gold USB drive. I set it on the table between us. It sat there, gleaming maliciously in the natural light. "I accidentally took this from his table after he hit me," I explained, my voice steadying. "Thaddeus showed up at my apartment this morning. He tried to force me to sign an NDA for $20,000. But he buried a clause in it. He tried to make me sign away Mom's $1.5 million trust fund." Delphine's eyes flashed with genuine surprise, followed quickly by a cold, calculating fury. "He tried to steal Marie's trust? He's getting sloppy. Desperate." She leaned forward, her eyes locked on the USB drive. "And he threatened you over this?" "He said if I touch the data, I'll go to prison," I said. "Aunt Delphine, I'm a forensic accountant. I know how to read the numbers. But I don't know how to fight him. He has armies of lawyers. He has the press in his pocket. He has nothing but smoke and mirrors." "Vesper," Delphine interrupted, her voice cutting through my panic like a blade. She stood up and began pacing the room. "The family story is that I went mad. That I demanded too much and threw a tantrum. Let me tell you the truth. 10 years ago, I was reviewing the accounts for a new commercial development in downtown Boston. I found discrepancies. Massive ones. He was setting up shell companies, funneling investor money offshore, and inflating property values to secure more loans. It was a Ponzi scheme built on real estate." I stared at her, stunned. "You caught him committing fraud?" "I caught him building a house of cards," she corrected. I confronted him. I told him he had to restructure, pay back the investors, and step down. Do you know what he did?" "He pushed you out," I guessed. He threatened to destroy my career, frame me for the embezzlement, and ruin my life, she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. He had Thaddeus manufacture evidence against me. I had a choice: fight a battle I couldn't win and go to jail, or walk away and let him paint me as the crazy aunt. I walked away. I built my own wealth quietly. I waited, because I knew, eventually, the rot would eat its way to the surface. She stopped pacing and looked down at the USB drive. And now, 10 years later, his beaten, underestimated daughter walks into my house holding the key to his kingdom. Tell me, Vesper, are you prepared to burn it all down? Because if we plug this in, there is no going back. You will be declaring war on a man who destroys everything he touches. I thought about the smirk on Cressida's face. I thought about the sting of Alaric's hand on my cheek. I thought about the years of being called a peasant, a disgrace, a burden. I thought about Thaddeus trying to steal the only thing my mother had left me. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt a cold, hard clarity. I brought the matches, I said softly. Delphine smiled. A real, terrifying smile. She walked over to her massive mahogany desk and pulled out a heavily modified laptop. It looked like military hardware. She brought it over to the coffee table and set it down next to the drive. Alaric encrypts everything. He thinks he's a genius, she muttered, booting up the machine. The screen filled with lines of rapidly scrolling code. But he uses the same security firm he's used for 15 years. Arrogance makes men lazy. Let's see what secrets he's hiding in the dark. She picked up the USB drive, her fingers brushing against the gold trim, and slotted it firmly into the side of the laptop. A small red light on the drive began to pulse. We sat in silence, the only sound the frantic clicking of Delphine's keyboard as she bypassed the initial security walls. I leaned in, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was about to look into the abyss of my father's empire. And I fully intended to push him in. What kind of monster was I about to wake up? The red light on the USB drive blinked rapidly, a tiny heartbeat of impending doom. Delphine's fingers flew across the keyboard with a practiced, lethal grace. The screen of her heavily modified laptop reflected in her piercing blue eyes. I sat beside her, my bruised cheek throbbing in time with the blinking light. We were breaking the law. There was no denying it. If Thaddeus found out, he would have me in handcuffs before sunset. But sitting in this fortress of glass and steel, with the Atlantic Ocean roaring outside, the fear felt distant. It was replaced by a cold, clinical anticipation. He's using a dual-layer AES encryption, Delphine muttered, her eyes starting across the cascading lines of code. Standard corporate paranoia. But like I said, he's lazy. He hasn't updated his core algorithm since I left. Give me 3 minutes. I watched her work, mesmerized. This was the woman I had been told to fear my entire life. The unstable aunt. The hysterical woman who couldn't handle the pressure of the family business. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Alaric hadn't just stolen her career, he had stolen her reputation. He had weaponized her gender and her emotions to discredit her. It made my blood boil. It was the exact same tactic he was using on me now. Calling me a disgrace. Calling me useless. Got it, Delphine said softly. The screen cleared. The scrolling code vanished, replaced by a simple, terrifyingly organized file directory. There were dozens of folders, all meticulously labeled. Cayman Holdings. Cressida Brand, private. Political contributions, unofficial. Trusts and NDAs. It was an entire ecosystem of corruption, neatly categorized. Mother of God, Delphine whispered, her professional detachment slipping for a fraction of a second. He hasn't just been hiding money. He's been running a shadow empire. Open the Cressida folder, I said, my voice sounding strangely calm. The forensic accountant in me was taking over. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. Delphine double-clicked the folder. A sprawling spreadsheet filled the screen. My eyes instantly began scanning the columns, translating the raw numbers into a narrative. I saw the operating costs, the marketing budgets, the retail leases. And then I saw the revenue. Or rather, the severe lack of it. Her brand is hemorrhaging money, I said, leaning closer to the screen. I pointed at a column labeled Net Deficit. Look at this. She's operating at a $2.5 million loss annually. For the last 3 years. $2.5 million, Delphine repeated, shaking her head. That's impossible. Alaric's board of directors would never approve a sustained loss like that. They would have shut the lifestyle brand down years ago. How's he keeping it afloat? He's subsidizing it, I said, my eyes tracking a series of transfers from an external account. Look here. Every quarter, a massive cash injection comes in from an account ending in 4822. It balances the books just enough to pass a surface-level audit. He's artificially inflating her success. Delphine frowned, her fingers flying over the keyboard again. Let's find out who owns account 4822. She ran a cross-reference search through the main directory. A few seconds later, a new document popped up. It was a banking manifesto. The name on the account made the breath leave my lungs in a sharp, painful rush. The Orphan Relief Charity Fund, I read aloud, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Silence descended on the room, heavy and sickening. The roaring ocean outside seemed to mute itself. The charity gala. The one I had attended last night. The one where I had been slapped. It was an annual event hosted by Alaric to raise money for underprivileged youth in Boston. It was his crowning philanthropic achievement. He paraded politicians and celebrities across the stage, posing with giant novelty checks, soaking in the applause of the city. He's stealing from orphans to fund Cressida's vanity project, Delphine said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. He's using charitable donations to cover the losses of a luxury lifestyle brand. I felt physically ill. The sheer depravity of it was staggering. It wasn't just white-collar crime. It was monstrous. Wait, I said, a sudden, sickening thought striking me. I grabbed the mouse from Delphine and navigated back to the main ledger for Cressida's brand. I searched for transactions dated within the last 2 weeks. I found it. A line item categorized under Event Wardrobe. The amount was exactly $100,000. The payment source was the charity fund account. The dress, I choked out, pointing at the screen with a trembling finger. The white silk dress I spilled wine on last night. The one he hit me over. The one he said I ruined. He bought it with stolen charity money. Delphine stared at the screen, her jaw tight. He assaulted you for ruining a dress paid for by orphans. A dress worn by a woman who produces nothing but debt. The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Cressida wasn't a successful entrepreneur. She was a parasite, feeding off a fraud perpetrated by our father. Her entire life, her arrogance, her smirks, it was all a taxpayer-subsidized illusion. And I, the one they called useless, the one they banished to the shadows, was the only one living in reality. The anger that had been simmering inside me since last night suddenly boiled over. It wasn't a hot, frantic rage. It was a cold, absolute fury. It was the kind of anger that tears down empires. We need to go deeper, I said, my voice hard as flint. If he's doing this with the charity, what is he doing with the main corporate accounts? Thaddeus said the market was volatile. He said Alaric was stressed. Delphine nodded, her eyes reflecting the same cold fire. She opened the folder labeled Cayman Holdings. This was the real vault. The spreadsheets here were vastly more complex, layered with jargon designed to confuse even seasoned auditors. But I wasn't just seasoned. I was motivated. We worked for hours. The sun moved across the sky, casting long shadows into the sleek living room, but neither of us noticed. We drank black coffee and dissected the financial anatomy of a monster. The further we dug, the worse it got. Alaric wasn't just struggling. He was drowning. He had taken out massive, high-interest loans using properties he didn't fully own as collateral. He was moving money between shell companies to create the illusion of liquidity. It was a classic, massive Ponzi structure, and it was teetering on the edge of total collapse. Look at this total liability, I said, rubbing my tired eyes. I highlighted a cell at the bottom of a master sheet. $45 million, Delphine read, letting out a low whistle. He is $45 million in the red. If the banks call in even one of those fraudulent loans, The entire company goes bankrupt overnight. He faces federal prison. That's why he was so desperate to get the USB drive back, I realized. And that's why Thaddeus tried to steal my mother's trust fund in the NDA. They need liquid cash. Desperately. They were going to use my inheritance to plug a hole in their sinking ship. I leaned back in the sofa, the magnitude of what we had uncovered washing over me. I had walked into this house a battered victim seeking shelter. I was walking out an executioner. Alaric had built a kingdom on fear, lies, and stolen money. He had sacrificed my mental health, my aunt's reputation, and the well-being of actual orphans to maintain his illusion of grandeur. So, Delphine said, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. She turned to look at me, her blue eyes piercing. We have the weapon. We have the motive. We have the proof. What is your move, Vesper? Because we can't just hand this to the police. Alaric owns half the judges in this city. He'll tie it up in litigation for decades while he shreds the evidence. I looked at the bruised reflection of my face in the dark screen of the laptop. I didn't want justice in a quiet courtroom. I didn't want a settlement. I wanted exactly what he had given me. I wanted public, undeniable humiliation. I wanted the world to see the monster without his mask. We don't go to the police, I said, a dangerous smile touching my split lip. We go to the press. The one man Alaric hasn't been able to buy. We call Gideon. Delphine's eyebrows shot up. Gideon? The investigative bulldog from the Boston Standard? He's been trying to nail Alaric for years. If you give him this. I give him everything, I interrupted. But we do it on my terms. We do it on my timeline. Cressida has the biggest launch party of her career this Friday. Hundreds of investors, influencers, and press will be there. Alaric is relying on that launch to secure a new round of funding to keep the lights on. Delphine smiled. It was the proud, terrifying smile of a predator. You want to drop the bomb while they are standing on stage. I want to burn it all down, I said. Are you with me? Oh, darling, Delphine whispered. I've been waiting for this fire for 10 years. The trap was set. But how violently would the rats fight back when they realized the doors were locked? The next 3 days were a blur of encrypted emails, burner phones, and clandestine meetings in the dim, stale air of underground parking garages. Delphine's fortress became our war room. We printed out hundreds of pages of ledgers, highlighting the darkest sins of the Alaric Empire in bright, unforgiving neon yellow. The numbers were undeniable. They told a story of a man so consumed by his own image that he would cannibalize his own flesh and blood to maintain it. I spent hours walking Gideon, the grizzled investigative journalist from the Boston Standard, through the labyrinth of Alaric's finances. Gideon was a man who lived on black coffee and cynicism. He had spent his career chasing ghosts in the financial district, always coming up just short of the smoking gun. When I first slid the printed bank statements across the metal table of the parking garage, he had looked at me with deep suspicion. He knew I was Alaric's daughter. He suspected a trap. But as I broke down the money laundering scheme, as I traced the flow of funds from the orphan relief charity to Cressida's failing lifestyle brand, the skepticism in his eyes vanished, replaced by a hungry, predatory gleam. This isn't just a story, Vesper, Gideon had said, his voice a gravelly whisper echoing off the concrete walls. This is a federal indictment. If I publish this, your father doesn't just lose his company. He goes away for a very long time. Are you absolutely certain you want to pull this trigger? I had looked him dead in the eye, my bruised cheek a silent testament to my resolve. I want you to pull it on Friday, at exactly 7 p.m. Gideon had smiled, a grim, humorless expression. Friday at 7. The exact time Cressida takes the stage for her launch event. You have a flair for the dramatic, kid. I like it. Now it was Thursday afternoon. The bomb was primed. The article was written, fact-checked, and locked behind a publication embargo. All we had to do was wait. But the silence from my family was beginning to fray my nerves. Since Thaddeus had stormed out of my apartment, there had been no calls. No texts. No threats. It was unnatural. Alaric was a man who demanded control. Silence wasn't in his playbook unless he was maneuvering something in the dark. I was sitting at Delphine's kitchen island, staring at my burner phone, when my personal cell phone buzzed. I jumped, startled by the sudden noise. I looked at the caller ID. It was Saskia, my stepmother. The enabler. The woman who had perfected the art of looking the other way while Alaric terrorized the household. I hesitated, then answered. I needed to know what they were planning. Vesper, darling, Saskia's voice floated through the speaker, sickly sweet and dripping with fake concern. I am so glad you finally picked up. We have all been simply sick with worry. Save it, Saskia, I said coldly. What do you want? She let out a theatrical sigh. Your father is distressed, Vesper. And Cressida, oh, the poor girl is practically catatonic. Her beautiful dress ruined. And the scandal of it all. She can barely focus on her launch tomorrow. You have been terribly, terribly cruel. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles turning white. Cruel? He slapped me so hard I bled on the floor. He stole money from orphans to buy that dress. Don't you dare lecture me about cruelty. There was a pause on the line. The sweetness vanished from Saskia's voice, replaced by a cold, sharp edge. You are unstable, Vesper. You always have been. Prone to wild fantasies and dramatic outbursts. It's why your father had to be firm with you. And now you've stolen company property. That USB drive contains sensitive proprietary information. It contains $45 million in fraudulent debt, Saskia, I shot back. And evidence of federal tax evasion. Saskia let out a condescending little laugh. Oh, Vesper. Always playing the accountant. You don't understand how business works at this level. Now, listen to me carefully. Your father is a forgiving man. He is willing to give you one last chance to fix this before he is forced to take drastic measures to protect the family from your delusions. I'm listening, I lied. I hit the record button on my burner phone, holding it close to the speaker. Tomorrow at 5, Thaddeus will be waiting for you at his office downtown. You will bring the USB drive. You will sign the non-disclosure agreement. And you will attend Cressida's launch at 7 to show the world that we are a united, loving family. If you do this, your father will ignore the theft. He will pay you the $20,000. He might even forgive you for your behavior. And if I don't? I asked, my voice dangerously soft. Then he will destroy you, Vesper, Saskia said, the venom finally leaking through. He will have you arrested for corporate espionage. He will freeze whatever meager assets you have. He will ensure you never work in this city again. You will be nothing. You are nothing without this family. You are a peasant. She hung up. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the dial tone buzzing in my ear. A peasant. A disgrace. Useless. The words didn't hurt anymore. They were just fuel. I ended the recording on the burner phone and looked up to see Delphine standing in the doorway, a grim expression on her face. They're trying to force a checkmate, she said, having heard the entire conversation. They want to trap you in Thaddeus's office right before the launch. If you don't show, they'll call the police and report the drive stolen. They'll use the arrest to discredit whatever you say. Then I guess I have to show up, I said, sliding the phone into my pocket. Delphine frowned. Vesper, it's a trap. If you walk into that office, Thaddeus will not let you leave until you sign that NDA. He'll have security block the doors. They will physically intimidate you. I know, I said, a calm certainty settling over me. But they don't know that Gideon's article is set on an automated timer. They don't know that I've already handed over the evidence. They think they still have leverage. I'm going to walk into that room, and I'm going to look Alaric in the eye, and I'm going to let him believe he's won. Right up until the moment his world burns. Delphine stared at me for a long moment, searching my face for any sign of hesitation. She found none. The battered girl who had arrived on her doorstep was gone. In her place was a woman forged in the fire of their cruelty. You're going to need a good suit, Delphine said finally, a proud smirk touching her lips. If you're going to attend a funeral, you should dress for the occasion. The next 24 hours dragged by with agonizing slowness. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I just mentally rehearsed every move, every word, every possible reaction. I was preparing for a war I had been fighting my entire life, but this time, I had the nuclear codes. Friday arrived with a heavy, oppressive gray sky. the kind of Boston weather that promises a storm. I dressed carefully. A sharp, tailored black suit. Stiletto heels that clicked against the floor like hammers. I pulled my hair back into a severe, professional knot. I didn't cover the bruise on my face. The purple and yellow swelling was a badge of honor. It was the physical manifestation of his guilt, and I wanted him to stare at it. I took a cab downtown, arriving at the towering glass skyscraper that housed Thaddeus's law firm at exactly 10 minutes to 5. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my hands were completely steady. I walked through the marble lobby, the clicking of my heels echoing off the walls. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 42nd floor. The doors slid open to a reception area that screamed old money and intimidation. Persian rugs, dark mahogany paneling, and a receptionist who looked at my bruised face with barely concealed shock. "Vesper," the receptionist said, quickly recovering her professional mask. "They are waiting for you in conference room A." "I know the way," I said, walking past her without a second glance. I approached the heavy double doors of conference room A. I could hear the murmur of voices inside. Alaric's deep, booming baritone. Thaddeus's reedy, nervous cadence. And Cressida's sharp, impatient whine. They were all there. The entire viper's nest, gathered to force me into submission. I placed my hands on the cool metal handles of the doors. I took one last, deep breath. The storm was here. I pushed the doors open and walked into the lion's den. The game was about to change permanently. But would my nerve hold when the real screaming started? Thank you for following the first part of the story. If you empathize and want to support Vesper, please leave a comment. I'm Win. This is a special sign for the amazing viewers who have watched this far. I will like and reply to all comments containing the keyword I'm Win. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the shocking plot twist in the next part. The conference room was a monument to intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the Boston skyline, reducing the people below to insignificant ants. That was exactly how my father liked to view the world. The air in the room was thick with the scent of expensive leather, lemon polish, and Alaric's signature heavy cedar cologne. It was designed to make you feel small before a single word was spoken. I stepped fully into the room, letting the heavy doors swing shut behind me with a solid, echoing thud. The sound seemed to break a spell. All three of them turned to look at me. Alaric sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, looking like a king holding court. He wore a navy blue bespoke suit, every hair perfectly in place. There was no trace of the out-of-control monster who had struck me days ago. He looked calm, collected, and utterly arrogant. To his right sat Cressida, legs crossed, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than my car. She was tapping her manicured nails against the wood, looking intensely bored. To his left was Thaddeus, hovering over a thick stack of papers, his eyes darting nervously between me and the door. "You're late," Alaric said. His voice was smooth, a low baritone that didn't betray a hint of anxiety. He didn't ask how my face was. He didn't acknowledge the massive, ugly purple bruise covering my left cheek. I might as well have been wearing a new shade of blush for all he cared. I was admiring the view, I replied, my voice steady. I walked slowly toward the table, my heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. I didn't sit down. I stopped opposite Alaric, placing my hands on the cool surface of the mahogany. "So, we are here to fix the mess." Cressida rolled her eyes, letting out a sharp, dramatic sigh. "God, Vesper, just sit down and sign the papers so we can leave. I have a major launch event in 2 hours, and your little stunt has already caused me enough stress. Do you have any idea how hard it was to find a replacement dress on such short notice?" I looked at her. Really looked at her. Her perfect makeup, her perfectly styled hair, the absolute void of empathy in her eyes. "I'm sure it was a tragedy, Cressida. Almost as tragic as the orphans who paid for it." The room went dead silent. Cressida's brow furrowed in genuine confusion. She didn't know. Alaric kept her completely in the dark about where the money actually came from. She was just the pretty face of the operation. But Thaddeus froze. The lawyer's pen stopped moving midair. Alaric's expression didn't change, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. Just once. It was the only tell he had. I don't have time for your riddles, Vesper, he said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave, taking on a harder edge. He reached out and picked up a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen. He tossed it casually across the table. It slid over the polished wood and stopped right in front of me, resting on top of the NDA. The drive. Put it on the table. Sign the document. Take the 20,000. And then you can walk out of here and go back to your miserable little life. I looked down at the contract. I looked at the pen. I could feel the weight of the USB drive in my blazer pocket. This was the moment. The precipice. If I signed, the war was over. I would be safe, but I would be forever broken. I would be validating every terrible thing he had ever said about me. I would be the useless, easily bought peasant. I picked up the heavy gold pen. Thaddeus let out a small, audible breath of relief. Cressida checked her reflection in her phone screen. Alaric leaned back in his chair, a faint, victorious smirk touching his lips. He thought he had won. He always won. I pulled the cap off the pen. I looked Alaric dead in the eye. You called me a disgrace, I said softly, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. You hit me so hard I bled on the floor. You humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. And then you sent your dog, I gestured to Thaddeus, to try and steal my mother's trust fund to cover up your financial crimes. Alaric leaned forward, his hands slamming flat onto the table. You insolent little brat. You do not know what you are talking about. Sign the paper. I know exactly what I am talking about, I shot back, my voice rising. I didn't sign the paper. Instead, I gripped the pen like a dagger and drove the gold nib straight down into the mahogany table, right through the center of the contract. The wood splintered with a sharp crack. Cressida jumped, letting out a startled shriek. Thaddeus scrambled backward, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I am not signing anything, I said, my voice echoing off the glass walls. And I don't have the USB drive with me. But I do have something else. I reached into my inside pocket and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a printed bank statement. I tossed it onto the table, right next to the ruined contract and the embedded pen. That, I said, pointing at the paper, is the ledger for the Orphan Relief Charity Fund. It shows a direct transfer of $100,000 to the design house that made Cressida's ruined dress. It also shows the quarterly transfers of hundreds of thousands of dollars to keep her failing lifestyle brand afloat. You are operating at a $2.5 million deficit, Alaric. Your entire empire is built on fraud, stolen charity funds, and illegal loans. The blood drained from Alaric's face. He looked at the paper, then back at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and sheer, unadulterated terror. The mask was gone. The king was dead. And I was the one holding the bloody crown. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a $45 million empire crumbling into dust. Cressida was the first to speak. She leaned over, picking up the piece of paper with trembling fingers. She read the highlighted lines. She wasn't an accountant, but she wasn't completely illiterate either. Dad, her voice wavered, high and thin. Dad, what is this? What does she mean, charity funds? You said the brand was profitable. You told me the investors loved me. Alaric ignored her. His eyes were locked on me, burning with a rage so intense it felt physical. His face turned a dark, dangerous shade of purple. He stood up slowly, pushing his heavy leather chair back. Where did you get this? He hissed, his voice sounding like a snake uncoiling in the dark. I got it from the drive you left on the table, I said calmly, crossing my arms. The drive you were so desperate to get back. You really should be more careful with your toys, Alaric. Especially when your useless daughter is a forensic accountant. You stupid, arrogant bitch, Alaric roared, launching himself forward across the table. He reached for my throat, his hands curled into claws. I didn't flinch. I didn't step back. Thaddeus moved faster than I thought possible for a man his age. He grabbed Alaric by the shoulders, pulling him back. Stop. Martin, stop. Are you out of your mind? If you touch her here, in this office, with cameras in the hallway, it's over. Alaric struggled for a moment, then ripped himself out of Thaddeus's grip. He stood there, chest heaving, straightening his suit jacket with shaking hands. He took a deep breath, trying to force the monster back into its cage. "Thaddeus," he commanded, his voice trembling slightly. "Call security. Have her detained. Confiscate her phone, her bag, everything. We will hold her here until she tells us where the drive is." Thaddeus didn't move. The lawyer was staring at the single sheet of paper on the table as if it were a venomous snake. The color had completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking sickly and gray. "Thaddeus," Alaric barked. "Did you hear me? Call security." "No," Thaddeus whispered. Alaric blinked, completely thrown off guard. "What did you say to me?" Thaddeus slowly looked up, his eyes wide and panicked. The realization of what was happening had finally hit him. He was a lawyer. He knew the law. He knew the penalty for wire fraud, embezzlement, and stealing from a registered charity. He knew what a federal indictment looked like. And he knew that he had his name on dozens of documents tied to those accounts. "I said no," Thaddeus repeated, his voice gaining strength, fueled by sheer self-preservation. He backed away from the table, raising his hands in surrender. "You told me the offshore accounts were legitimate. You told me the charity funds were segregated. If she has the master ledgers." "Alaric, this is a federal crime. This is the IRS. This is the FBI. I cannot be part of this." "You are my lawyer," Alaric screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "You work for me. You fix this. I can't fix a sunken ship." Thaddeus yelled back, his professional demeanor entirely gone. He scrambled over to his briefcase, snapping it shut without even grabbing his notes. He looked at me, a desperate pleading in his eyes. Vesper, listen to me. I had no idea about the charity money. I swear to you. I just drafted the NDAs. I was just following orders." I looked at him with absolute disgust. "You tried to steal my mother's trust fund yesterday, Thaddeus. Don't play the innocent victim now. The rats are fleeing the ship, Alaric. And it looks like your best swimmer is leading the pack." Thaddeus didn't say another word. He turned and bolted for the door, tearing it open and sprinting down the hallway, leaving his most lucrative client standing alone in the ruins of his own arrogance. Cressida was crying now. Real, ugly tears ruining her perfect makeup. "My launch," she sobbed, clutching the paper. "My brand. You ruined my brand, Vesper. Everyone is going to be there tonight. The press, the investors. What am I supposed to do?" "You're going to do what you always do, Cressida," I said softly. "You're going to stand on a stage and pretend you're something you're not. Only this time, you won't have Daddy's stolen money to buy the applause." Alaric was hyperventilating. He braced his hands on the table, staring at the floor. He was trying to think of a way out. A bribe, a threat, a loophole. But there were none. The math was absolute. I checked my watch. It was 5:30. The trap had sprung, the prey was caught, and now it was time for the execution. "I'd love to stay and watch you panic," I said, turning toward the door. "But I have somewhere to be. Cressida, good luck with the launch tonight. It's going to be a highly publicized event. Alaric, I suggest you call a different lawyer. Thaddeus is probably halfway to the airport by now." "Vesper," Alaric croaked. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard him sound defeated. "Vesper, please. We can make a deal. Name your price. The trust fund? It's yours. Just give me the drive. Give me 24 hours. I paused at the door, looking back at the man who had tormented me for my entire existence. "You don't get 24 hours, I said. You don't get a deal. You wanted me to be a ruthless, calculating businesswoman. Congratulations, Dad. You finally taught me something useful." I walked out of the conference room, leaving the doors wide open. The receptionist stared at me as I passed, her mouth hanging open. I stepped into the elevator, hit the lobby button, and let the doors close on my old life. I felt lighter than I had in 27 years. The air in the elevator tasted like freedom. But the grand finale was yet to come. The venue for Cressida's lifestyle brand launch was an ultra-modern art gallery in the Seaport District. It was all exposed brick, steel beams, and floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the harbor. It was the kind of place that charged thousands of dollars just to turn on the lights. Alaric had spared no expense. There were crystal chandeliers hung specifically for the night, a massive ice sculpture of Cressida's logo, and waiters circulating with silver trays of champagne. It was a perfect, glittering lie. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I stood across the street in the cold winter air, wrapped in a heavy wool coat, a steaming cup of coffee in my hands. Beside me stood Aunt Delphine, her eyes fixed on the glass front of the gallery. We had a perfect view of the main stage and the massive LED screen positioned behind it. "Are you sure Gideon is ready?" Delphine asked, her breath fogging in the cold air. I checked the encrypted messaging app on my burner phone. He texted 2 minutes ago. The article is locked and loaded on the Boston Standard's main page. The server push is scheduled for exactly 7 o'clock. Delphine pulled out a small electronic tablet from her coat pocket. And my guy on the inside just confirmed he has remote access to their audio-visual system. The second the article goes live, he flips the switch. She looked at me, a fierce pride in her eyes. "This is it, kid. No turning back." "I burned the bridge hours ago," I replied, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. Inside the gallery, the crowd was swelling. Hundreds of Boston's elite, fashion influencers, and potential investors mingled, totally unaware that they were standing on a financial landmine. At 6:55, the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the crowd. A spotlight snapped on, illuminating the center of the stage. Cressida walked out. She had managed to fix her makeup and put on a brave face. She wore a stunning, backless emerald gown. She smiled, waving to the crowd as applause broke out. She looked like a star. She walked up to the microphone, radiating a manufactured confidence. Through the glass, we could see her mouth moving, though we couldn't hear the words. She was delivering her practice speech about female empowerment, building an empire, and the importance of luxury. It was sickening. She was selling a dream funded by the nightmares of orphans. I looked at my watch. 6:58. "Where is he?" I muttered, scanning the crowd near the stage. "There," Delphine pointed. Alaric was standing just off stage, half hidden in the shadows. Even from across the street, I could see the tension vibrating off him. He was constantly checking his phone, probably waiting for an alert from Thaddeus or trying to contact his offshore bankers. He looked like a man standing on the gallows, waiting for the trapdoor to open. 6:59. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was the climax of a lifetime of abuse. This was the reckoning. 7 o'clock. It happened in a cascading wave of chaos. First, my own phone buzzed in my pocket. A news alert from the Boston Standard. Then, Delphine's phone chimed. Through the massive glass windows, I watched the ripple effect. A man in the front row looked down at his phone. His brow furrowed. He tapped the shoulder of the woman next to him, showing her the screen. Her hand flew to her mouth. Then another phone lit up. And another. Within 30 seconds, half the room was staring at their glowing screens instead of Cressida. The headline was designed to detonate: the charity scam, how Boston's billionaire Alaric funded his daughter's lifestyle brand with stolen orphan funds. Exclusive audio and ledgers inside. Cressida faltered. She noticed the shifting energy in the room. The whispers were starting, rising like a swarm of angry bees. She looked off stage toward Alaric, her eyes wide with panic. Alaric was staring at his phone, his face a mask of absolute horror. He looked up, locking eyes with Cressida across the stage. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of total defeat. Then, Delphine tapped a button on her tablet. "Showtime," she whispered. Inside the gallery, the massive LED screen behind Cressida flickered. The elegant logo of her brand vanished. In its place, projected in massive, undeniable letters for everyone to see, was the front page of the Boston Standard article. The headline blared across the room. But that wasn't all. Delphine's contact inside had hijacked the audio system. The soft, ambient background music cut out instantly. It was replaced by a voice. My father's voice. It was the recording from the voicemail he had left me, the one Gideon had embedded in the article. "You embarrassed yourself. Don't embarrass this family any further. Unfortunate." That is what last night was. Let's not blow this out of proportion. The recording looped. Over and over. The cold, callous dismissal of his own violence echoing through the ultra-modern gallery. The reaction was explosive. Investors began shouting. A prominent local politician who had backed the charity practically ran for the exit, desperate to avoid the cameras that were suddenly flashing everywhere. Journalists who had been invited to cover a fashion launch were now aggressively shoving their microphones toward the stage, shouting questions about fraud and embezzlement. Cressida backed away from the microphone, her hands covering her face. She looked small. She looked terrified. The golden child was finally burning in the spotlight she had always craved. Alaric tried to step onto the stage, trying to shield her, trying to shout down the crowd. But he was drowned out by the chaos. He looked out the massive glass windows, scanning the street. And for one brief, electrifying second, his eyes locked with mine across the asphalt. I didn't smirk. I didn't smile. I just stood there, the bruised, useless daughter, watching his empire burn to ash. I raised my cup of coffee in a silent, mocking toast. He stumbled back as if he had been physically struck. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. The Financial Crimes Unit didn't waste time when presented with $45 million of documented fraud. Blue and red lights began to reflect off the glass of the gallery. I turned away from the window. The cold air felt bracing and clean. "Let's go home, Aunt Delphine," I said. "The show is over." The fallout was catastrophic, swift, and highly televised. You can't steal from orphans and expect the public to offer grace. Within 48 hours of the launch party, Alaric was indicted on 32 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and tax evasion. His corporate offices were raided by the FBI. His assets were frozen globally. The massive real estate empire, built on decades of intimidation and shadow accounts, collapsed like a house of wet cards. The media tore the family apart. The Boston Standard ran a week-long series detailing every single shell company and illegal transfer I had uncovered. Cressida became the poster child for oblivious, toxic privilege. Her lifestyle brand was liquidated instantly. The investors sued her for fraud, claiming she had knowingly presented falsified financials. She didn't have Alaric's money to protect her anymore. She was entirely on her own. I moved out of my small apartment and rented a beautiful, airy loft in a quiet neighborhood. The trust fund my mother had left me, the one Thaddeus had tried to steal, was finally unfrozen and transferred entirely into my name. It turned out, once the patriarch is sitting in a federal holding cell, the probate lawyers suddenly become very cooperative. 1 month after the night of the gala, I was sitting on my new velvet sofa, drinking a cup of expensive loose-leaf tea, when my phone rang. The caller ID was a blocked number. I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. Vesper. The voice was a pathetic, ragged whisper. It was Cressida. "Hello, Cressida," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Vesper, please," she sobbed. It wasn't the dramatic, manipulative crying she used to employ. This was the raw, ugly sound of true desperation. They took the house. The bank foreclosed on my condo. My credit cards are all declining. I have nowhere to go. My friends, none of them will return my calls. They act like I have a disease. "You do have a disease, Cressida," I replied, taking a sip of my tea. "It's called being poor. It's highly contagious in your social circle." "How can you be so cruel?" she wailed, the anger briefly flaring up through the panic. "Dad is looking at 15 years in federal prison. The family is destroyed. You destroyed us." "No," I corrected her, my tone hardening. "Alaric destroyed this family the first time he stole a dime. He destroyed it every time he belittled me, every time he used you as a prop, and he certainly destroyed it the moment he struck me in public." "I didn't light the fire, Cressida. I just finally opened the door and let the world see the smoke." "I need money, Vesper," she begged, abandoning the argument. "Just a loan. A few thousand to get a lawyer. To get an apartment. Please. I'm your sister." I looked out my window at the peaceful, quiet street below. I thought about the 18-year-old girl who had cried in her room while her sister drove a new Porsche. I thought about the 27-year-old woman who had bled on a marble floor while her sister smirked. You once told me I was a useless disgrace, Cressida, I said softly. You said I ruined everything I touched. Well, I wouldn't want my useless money to taint your exquisite life. You're the CEO. Figure it out. I hung up the phone. Then I opened my settings and blocked the number permanently. I placed the phone on the coffee table and took a deep, shuddering breath. It was over. The ghost of Alaric's approval no longer haunted me. The shadow of Cressida's perfection was gone. I was finally completely free. The next afternoon, I visited Delphine. Her cliffside house was filled with the smell of roasting garlic and fresh bread. We sat on her massive deck, wrapped in blankets, watching the gray Atlantic waves crash against the rocks below. They offered him a plea deal today, Delphine said casually, handing me a glass of wine. 10 years, no parole, if he cooperates with the SEC on recovering the offshore funds. I took the glass, swirling the dark red liquid. It didn't remind me of blood anymore. It just looked like wine. Will he take it? He doesn't have a choice, Delphine smiled. His lawyers are bleeding him dry with retainers he can't pay. The king is dead, Vesper. Long live the bean counter. We clinked our glasses together. The sound of crystal ringing in the cold air was a victory bell. I had spent my whole life being told I was too small, too quiet, too unremarkable. I had been taught that power looked like loud voices, expensive suits, and the ability to hurt people without consequence. But I had learned the truth. Real power doesn't scream. Real power is quiet. Real power is knowing exactly where the numbers hide, and having the patience to wait for the perfect moment to show them to the world. I looked down at the faded green notebook sitting on the table next to my wine. The Museum of Invisible Children. The pages were full of pain, but the final entry was different. The final entry just said, checked the math. The debt is paid. But as the days turn into weeks and the reality of Alaric sitting in a concrete cell sets in, I sometimes catch myself staring out the window, wondering about the nature of family. Many people say blood is thicker than water. They say that no matter how monstrous a parent is, they are still your parent. Alaric is an old man now, facing a decade in a brutal environment. He is broken, humiliated, and alone. So, I have to ask you all, because the internet is always full of opinions. Was I too harsh? Should I write a letter to the judge during his sentencing, offering a sliver of forgiveness to reduce his time in that cell? Should I give Cressida a small stipend from my trust fund so she doesn't end up on the street? Or should I lock the door, throw away the key, and let them rot in the hell they built for themselves? Tell me, did I cross the line, or did I draw the exact boundary they deserved? Thank you for following Vesper's entire journey. If this story resonates with you, or if you've ever been the invisible child in your family, please like, subscribe, and share your story in the comments. Your voice deserves to be heard. See you in the next stories.